Sometimes the most valuable thing in the world is invisible until someone dares to see it. This is a story about a woman who saw worth where others saw nothing, about a man who hid a fortune to find something money could never buy, and about a neighborhood that learned too late that cruelty has a price. But before empires were revealed and hearts were broken and mended, there was just a quiet street, a lonely librarian, and a stranger in a wheelchair who arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the autumn leaves were just beginning to fall. Claire Donovan had lived at 47 Maple Street for 6 years, and in all that time, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Not the kind of invisibility that comes from shyness or fear, but the kind that comes from being so thoroughly ordinary that people's eyes simply slide past you like water off glass. She was 32 years old, unmarried, childless, employed part-time at the Riverside Public Library where she shelved books and helped elderly patrons navigate the computer catalog. And she lived alone in a small two-bedroom house with blue shutters that needed painting and a garden she never quite had time to tend. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who always said hello, who brought casseroles when someone was sick, who picked up mail when people went on vacation, and who never, ever caused any trouble. They knew her, but they didn't see her. And that was exactly how Claire had learned to survive in a world that had taught her, through painful experience, that being seen meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant being hurt. The neighborhood itself was the kind of place real estate agents called charming and family-friendly, which really meant it was populated by people who cared deeply about property values, lawn maintenance, and what the neighbors might think. Maple Street curved gently through a development of modest single-family homes built in the 1980s, each one slightly different from the next, but all adhering to an unspoken code of acceptable suburban aesthetics. There were young families with minivans and basketball hoops, retired couples who spent their days gardening and their evenings watching game shows, and a handful of single professionals who were rarely home. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, where gossip traveled faster than the internet, and where deviation from the norm was noticed, discussed, and quietly discouraged. The Homeowners Association met monthly to debate the acceptable height of fences and the proper color palette for exterior paint. Block parties happened twice a year with the same potato salad recipes and the same conversations about weather and schools and the rising cost of everything. It was safe, predictable, and suffocatingly ordinary. Claire had moved here after her mother died, after the funeral expenses had eaten through what little savings remained, after her fiancé David had sat her down in a coffee shop and explained with infuriating reasonableness that he couldn't wait anymore, that he'd been patient but she'd chosen her dying mother over their future, over the job opportunity in Seattle, over him, and that he needed to move on with his life. She'd watched him walk away, this man she'd planned to marry, and she'd felt something inside her close up like a fist. She'd sold her mother's house, paid off the medical bills, and bought the cheapest place she could find in a neighborhood where no one knew her story, where she could be anonymous and safe and alone. That had been 6 years ago, and in all that time, she'd built a life that was small and manageable and entirely her own. She worked her shifts at the library. She volunteered at the senior center on Thursdays. She read novels in her backyard on summer evenings, and she kept everyone at a comfortable distance. She was kind but not close, friendly but not friends. She'd learned that caring too much meant losing too much, and she'd already lost enough. The house next to Claire's, number 45, had been empty for 8 months. Old Mr. Peterson had died the previous winter, and his children, who lived out of state and visited maybe twice a year, had put the house on the market immediately. It was a modest ranch-style home with beige siding and a detached garage. Nothing special, but the market was slow and the price kept dropping. Claire had watched various potential buyers come and go, couples with measuring tapes and contractors with clipboards, but no one had made an offer. The lawn grew shaggy, the mailbox filled with junk mail, and the house took on that particular emptiness that abandoned places have, like they're holding their breath waiting for life to return. Claire sometimes found herself looking at it from her kitchen window while she made her morning coffee, wondering who would eventually move in, hoping it would be someone quiet, someone who wouldn't throw loud parties or let their dog bark at all hours or try too hard to be neighborly. Then, on a Tuesday in late September, a moving truck appeared. Claire was coming home from her shift at the library, her canvas bag full of books she'd checked out for herself, when she saw the truck backed into the driveway of number 45. It wasn't a big truck, not the kind that suggested a family with accumulated decades of possessions, but a medium-sized rental, the kind a single person might use. There was a car, too, a dark blue sedan, practical and unremarkable, parked on the street. Claire slowed her pace, curiosity overriding her usual policy of minding her own business. Two men in matching gray shirts were unloading boxes, and there at the base of the driveway, directing them with quiet gestures, was a man in a wheelchair. Claire stopped walking entirely, standing on the sidewalk 3 houses down, watching. The man was young, maybe her age or a little older, with dark hair that needed cutting and a lean build. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt, and even from a distance there was something about the way he held himself, a kind of careful control, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. He was pointing to a box, saying something to one of the movers, and even though Claire couldn't hear the words, she could see the mover's dismissive shrug, the way he picked up a different box instead, ignoring the instruction. The man in the wheelchair said something else, more firmly this time, and the mover rolled his eyes in a way that made Claire's stomach tighten with secondhand embarrassment and anger. She should keep walking. She should go home, put away her groceries, make dinner, mind her own business. That was the rule she'd lived by for 6 years. But something about the scene, about the casual disrespect in the mover's body language, about the way the man in the wheelchair's shoulders tensed with frustration, made her feet move before her brain could stop them. "Excuse me," she called out, walking up the driveway with more confidence than she felt. "Do you need any help?" 3 heads turned toward her. The movers looked annoyed at the interruption. The man in the wheelchair looked surprised. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray-green, like the ocean before a storm, meeting hers with a mixture of wariness and something else, something that might have been hope quickly suppressed. "I'm fine," he said, his voice low and careful. "Thank you." "Are you sure?" Claire pressed, looking pointedly at the movers, "because it seems like there might be some confusion about which boxes go where." One of the movers, a thick-necked guy with a sunburn, bristled. "Lady, we're professionals. We know what we're doing." "Then perhaps you could do what your client is asking," Claire said, her librarian voice coming out, the one she used with teenagers who got too loud in the stacks. Polite, but with steel underneath. The man in the wheelchair's lips twitched, almost a smile. "The box with the red tape," he said to the movers, "goes to the bedroom. That's what I've been trying to tell you." The sunburned mover muttered something under his breath, but grabbed the correct box. His partner followed, and they disappeared into the house, leaving Claire and the stranger alone in the driveway. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the concrete, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and fell silent. "Thank you," the man said, and this time his voice was warmer, genuine. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Claire said, "but they were being rude." She hesitated, suddenly aware that she was standing in a stranger's driveway, that she'd inserted herself into a situation that wasn't her business, that she was doing exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do, which was get involved. "I'm Claire. I live next door, number 47. "Evan," he said, and offered his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused in a way that suggested he wasn't someone who sat idle. "Evan Ross." "Welcome to Maple Street," Claire said, and meant it. "If you need anything, I'm usually home in the evenings and weekends." Something flickered across Evan's face, an emotion too quick to name. "That's kind of you," he said carefully, "but I'm sure I'll manage." There was a finality in his tone, a polite dismissal, and Claire recognized it because she'd used it herself 1,000 times. She nodded, stepped back. "Of course." "Well, welcome anyway." She turned to go, then paused. "The garbage pickup is on Thursdays, and the HOA is very particular about where you put your bins, just so you know." This time, Evan did smile, a small, genuine expression that transformed his face from guarded to almost boyish. "Noted. Thank you, Claire." She walked back to her house, feeling his eyes on her back, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, a flutter of curiosity, of connection, of possibility. She told herself it was nothing, that she was just being neighborly, that she wouldn't make a habit of it. But that night, as she ate her dinner of reheated soup and watched the lights come on in the house next door, she found herself wondering about Evan Ross, about why he was alone, about what had brought him to this quiet, judgmental street, about what his story was. She would learn, in time, that some stories are worth the risk of being seen. The neighborhood noticed Evan immediately, of course. In a place where a new mailbox was cause for discussion, a new resident was a major event, and a new resident in a wheelchair was practically scandalous. By Wednesday morning, the gossip network was in full operation. Claire heard it at the library from Mrs. Henderson, who'd heard it from her daughter, who'd heard it from the mail carrier. A young man, alone, disabled, no family visible, no job apparent, moving into old Peterson's house. Where did he come from? What happened to him? Was he on disability? Was he safe? The questions multiplied like bacteria, each one more invasive than the last. And Claire felt her jaw tighten as she listened to Mrs. Henderson speculate about whether property values would be affected. "I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person," Claire said, her voice carefully neutral, as she checked out Mrs. Henderson's stack of romance novels. "Oh, I'm sure, dear, Mrs." Henderson said in that tone that meant she wasn't sure at all. "It's just sad, isn't it? A young man like that, you have to wonder what happened. Car accident, probably. Or maybe one of those terrible diseases. My cousin's son has multiple sclerosis, and he's in a wheelchair now, too. Just tragic." Claire handed over the books without comment, but inside she was seething. The casual pity, the assumption that Evan's life was automatically tragic because of his wheelchair, the way Mrs. Henderson spoke about him like he was a problem to be solved or a cautionary tale to be whispered about, it all made Claire want to scream. But she didn't. She smiled her professional smile and wished Mrs. Henderson a good day and went back to shelving books, slamming them onto the shelves with more force than necessary. That evening, she saw Evan in his driveway, struggling to get a bag of groceries from his car to his lap while managing his wheelchair. The bag was awkward, too full, and as she watched from her porch, it tipped, sending cans rolling across the concrete. Evan's face, even from a distance, showed frustration and something darker, something like despair. Claire didn't think. She just moved. "Let me help," she said, already bending to collect the runaway cans. "I've got it," Evan said, his voice tight. "I know you do," Claire said, gathering a can of soup, a can of beans, a can of tomatoes. "But I'm already here, so you might as well let me." She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. "Please." For a long moment, Evan just stared at her, and Claire could see the war happening behind his eyes. Pride versus practicality, independence versus acceptance. Finally, he exhaled, a long breath that seemed to carry more than just air. "Okay, thank you." They worked in silence, Claire collecting the scattered groceries and placing them carefully in the reusable bags on Evan's lap. When everything was gathered, she walked beside him to his front door, which he unlocked with a key attached to a lanyard around his neck. The interior of the house was sparse, boxes still stacked against walls, minimal furniture, nothing personal visible yet. It had the temporary feeling of a hotel room, like whoever lived here hadn't decided to stay. "Kitchen?" Claire asked, holding up the bags. "Straight back," Evan said, wheeling ahead of her. The kitchen was small but functional, and Claire set the bags on the counter. She started unpacking without asking, putting cans in the cupboard, milk in the fridge, bread on the counter. Evan watched her, not speaking, and Claire could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing, wondering. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "I know," Claire said, folding the empty bags, "but I wanted to." She turned to face him. "Look, I'm not trying to intrude or pity you or whatever you're thinking. I know what it's like to be new somewhere, to feel like everyone's watching and judging, and I thought maybe you could use one person who isn't." Evan's expression softened, the guardedness easing just slightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was thinking that." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Claire said. "I get it." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I mean it, though. If you need anything, I'm next door. And I promise I'm not going to make a habit of barging in." But for groceries, or if you need a ride somewhere, or just, I don't know, if you want company, I'm around. Why? Evan asked. And the question was so direct, so unguarded, that Claire was taken aback. She thought about it, about the real answer, which was complicated and tied up in her own loneliness and her own need to matter to someone, to be useful, to not be invisible. But she settled for a simpler truth. Because everyone deserves at least one friendly neighbor, and because you seem like you could use a friend. Evan looked at her for a long moment, and Claire had the strange sensation of being truly seen, not just looked at, but seen, the way she hadn't been in years. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you, Claire." She left feeling lighter than she had in months, not knowing that she'd just taken the first step into a story that would change everything. The neighborhood's reaction to Evan intensified over the following days. Claire heard it everywhere, at the library, at the grocery store, at the senior center where she volunteered. The whispers followed her like shadows. "There's something off about him. He never smiles. He's always alone. Why would someone like that move here?" And then, inevitably, the comments about Claire herself. "She's always over there. What's she doing? Does she think she's some kind of saint?" It's weird, don't you think? A single woman spending so much time with a strange man, what does she get out of it? Claire tried to ignore it, but ignoring gossip in a neighborhood like Maple Street was like trying to ignore a fire alarm. It was everywhere, constant grating. She found herself defensive in conversations she hadn't asked to have, explaining to people who hadn't earned an explanation that she was just being neighborly, that Evan was a nice person, that there was nothing strange or suspicious about helping someone. But the more she defended him, the more the neighborhood seemed to double down on their judgment. Linda Pritchard was the worst. Linda lived 4 houses down in a meticulously maintained colonial with a garden that won HOA awards and a personality that could curdle milk. She was in her mid-50s, married to a dentist, and had made it her life's mission to be the unofficial mayor of Maple Street. She organized the block parties, ran the HOA meetings, and knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. And she had decided, apparently, that Evan Ross was a problem. Claire encountered her at the mailbox on a Saturday morning, and Linda wasted no time. "Claire, dear, I've been meaning to talk to you," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "About your new neighbor." "What about him?" Claire asked, flipping through her mail without looking up. "Well, several of us have noticed that you've been spending quite a bit of time over there," Linda said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "And we're just concerned. You're a single woman and well, we don't really know anything about him, do we? Where he came from, what he does, why he's here. It's a safety issue, you understand." Claire looked up slowly, meeting Linda's eyes with a coldness she usually reserved for patrons who tried to return damaged books. "He's a person, Linda. A person who moved into a house he presumably bought or rented, just like the rest of us. And what I do with my time is my business." Linda's smile tightened. "Of course, dear. I'm just saying people are talking. And you know how it is. We have to think about the neighborhood, about property values, about the kind of community we want to maintain." "And what kind of community is that?" Claire asked, her voice sharp. "One where we judge people based on their physical ability? One where we gossip about our neighbors instead of welcoming them? Is that the community you want, Linda?" Linda's face flushed. "There's no need to be rude, Claire. I'm just trying to look out for you and for the neighborhood. That man is, well, he's obviously got problems. And you're wasting your time playing nurse or social worker or whatever it is you think you're doing. People are starting to think you're a bit, well, desperate." The word hit like a slap, and for a moment Claire couldn't breathe. Desperate, that's what they thought. That she was so lonely, so pathetic, that she'd latch onto anyone, even a disabled man, who the neighborhood had decided was beneath their notice. The cruelty of it, the casual viciousness, made her hands shake. "I think we're done here," Claire said, her voice ice. She turned and walked back to her house, Linda's voice calling after her with some half-hearted apology that Claire didn't bother to acknowledge. Inside, she leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding, tears of anger and humiliation burning behind her eyes. She hated that Linda's words had gotten to her, hated that some part of her wondered if it was true. If she was being desperate, if she was projecting her own loneliness onto Evan, using him to fill some void in her own life. But then she thought about Evan's smile when she'd helped him with his groceries, about the way he'd thanked her with genuine warmth, about the conversation they'd had a few days ago when she'd brought over some extra tomatoes from her garden and they'd ended up talking for an hour about books and music and nothing important. He wasn't a project or a charity case. He was a person she was starting to genuinely like. She pushed off the door, wiped her eyes, and made a decision. She didn't care what Linda Pritchard or anyone else thought. She was going to be Evan's friend, and if the neighborhood wanted to gossip about it, let them. Over the next few weeks, Claire and Evan fell into an easy rhythm. She'd stop by after work a few times a week, sometimes with an excuse, a borrowed cup of sugar or a package that had been delivered to her house by mistake, sometimes with nothing but the honest admission that she wanted company. Evan was always welcoming, always seemed genuinely pleased to see her, and gradually the walls he'd built around himself began to lower. They'd sit in his living room, which was slowly becoming more lived in, with books on shelves and a decent coffee maker on the kitchen counter and curtains that actually matched. And they'd talk, really talk. The kind of conversations Claire hadn't had in years, about everything and nothing, about childhood memories and favorite movies and the books they were reading and their opinions on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Evan was funny, Claire discovered, with a dry wit that caught her off guard, and it made her laugh in a way that felt rusty from disuse. He was smart, well-read, with opinions on literature and politics and art that were thoughtful and nuanced. He was kind, always asking about her day, remembering details she'd mentioned in passing, noticing when she seemed tired or stressed. And he was guarded, carefully steering conversations away from certain topics, his past, his family, what had happened to put him in a wheelchair, why he'd moved to this particular neighborhood. Claire noticed the deflections but didn't push. She understood the need for privacy, for keeping certain doors closed. She had her own doors she didn't open. But the neighborhood noticed their growing friendship, and the gossip intensified. Claire heard it in fragments, overheard conversations that stopped when she entered a room, pointed at the grocery store, and whispered comments at the library. She's over there all the time. What do you think they're doing? It's not natural. He's taking advantage of her. She's wasting her time on a cripple. The words were ugly, small-minded, cruel, and they made Claire's blood boil. But she said nothing, did nothing, just kept showing up at Evan's door, kept being his friend, kept refusing to let the neighborhood's judgment dictate her choices. Ivan noticed too. She could see it in the way his expression would close off when they encountered neighbors on the street, in the way he'd tense when someone stared too long, in the way he'd sometimes make self-deprecating comments about being a burden or taking up her time. It broke Claire's heart the way he'd internalized the world's cruelty, the way he seemed to believe that he was less than, that his worth was diminished by his wheelchair, that anyone who spent time with him was doing charity work rather than enjoying his company. "You know you're not a burden, right?" Claire said one evening. They were sitting on his back patio, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset. It was late October now, the air crisp with the promise of winter, the trees ablaze with color. Evan looked at her, surprised. "What?" "You're not a burden," Claire repeated. "I don't come over here because I feel sorry for you or because I think you need help. I came over because I like you, because you're interesting and funny and good company, because being here makes me happy." Evan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. "People don't usually see it that way," he said finally, his voice low. "People are idiots," Claire said bluntly, and Evan laughed, a real laugh that made his whole face light up. "Yeah," he agreed, "they really are." They sat in comfortable silence, and Claire felt something shift between them, something deepening, moving from friendship into territory that was both thrilling and terrifying. She was falling for him, she realized, not because he needed her, but because he saw her, really saw her, in a way no one had in years. He asked about her dreams, her fears, her past. He listened when she talked about her mother's death, about David's abandonment, about the loneliness she'd carried for so long. He didn't try to fix her or offer platitudes. He just listened, and that was everything. But she didn't know if he felt the same way. He was warm, affectionate even, but always with a careful distance, like he was holding something back. And Claire, scarred by past rejection, didn't dare push, didn't dare ask for more than he was willing to give. So she stayed in the safe zone of friendship, even as her heart wanted more. The neighborhood's hostility came to a head in early November. The HOA was having its monthly meeting, and Claire, who usually avoided these gatherings like the plague, decided to attend because she'd heard through the grapevine that Evan was going to be discussed. She sat in the back of the community center, surrounded by her neighbors, and listened as Linda Pritchard stood at the front and addressed the room with the authority of a general rallying troops. As you all know, Linda began, we have a new resident on Maple Street. And while we certainly want to be welcoming, we also have to consider the standards and values of our community. Several residents have expressed concerns about Mr. Ross, about his situation, and about whether he is a good fit for our neighborhood. Claire's hands clenched into fists. Around her, people were nodding, murmuring agreement. What concerns? Someone asked. Well, for one, he doesn't seem to work, Linda said. He's home all day, every day. And we don't know what his financial situation is. Is he on government assistance? Is he able to maintain his property? These are legitimate questions. His property looks fine, Claire said loudly, standing up. Every head in the room turned toward her. His lawn is mowed. His house is maintained. What exactly is the problem? Linda's smile was patronizing. Claire, dear, we know you've taken an interest in Mr. Ross, and that's very charitable of you. But the rest of us have concerns. He's different, and different things can be disruptive. Different how, Wusora? Claire demanded, her voice rising. Because he uses a wheelchair? Is that what this is about? You're all so uncomfortable with disability that you want to drive him out? No one's trying to drive anyone out, Linda said, though her tone suggested otherwise. We're simply discussing whether he's a good fit for the community standards we've worked hard to maintain. Community standards, Claire repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. You mean conformity. You mean everyone looking and acting the same way. God forbid someone be different, be disabled, be anything other than your narrow definition of acceptable. The room erupted in murmurs, some supportive, most defensive. Linda's face was red, her composure slipping. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Linda snapped. You've become so involved with this man that you can't see reason. People are talking, Claire. They're saying you're obsessed, that you're making a fool of yourself over a man who's, let's be honest, a charity case. You're wasting your time and your reputation on someone who will never be able to give you what you want. He's broken, Claire, and you can't fix him. The words hung in the air like poison, and Claire felt something inside her snap. She walked down the aisle toward Linda, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. Evan Ross is not broken, she said, her voice shaking with fury. He's a human being with dignity and worth and more kindness in his little finger than you have in your entire body. And if this neighborhood can't see that, if all of you are so small-minded and cruel that you'd rather gossip and judge than show basic human decency, then I want no part of this community. She turned and walked out, leaving a room full of shocked faces behind her. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding, but she felt strangely liberated, like she'd finally said something that needed to be said. Consequences, be damned. She went straight to Evan's house, knocked on his door, and when he answered, she saw immediately that he knew. His face was pale, his eyes dark with hurt, and something else. Something like resignation. You heard? Claire said. Mrs. Chen from across the street called me, Evan said quietly. She thought I should know what was being said at the meeting. She was trying to be kind, I think. Claire stepped inside without being invited, closing the door behind her. Evan, I'm so sorry. They're horrible, ignorant people, and you don't deserve any of this. Don't I? Evan said, and his voice was bitter in a way she'd never heard before. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a burden, a charity case. Maybe you are wasting your time. Stop it, Claire said fiercely. Don't you dare let them make you believe that. You are not what they say you are. Then what am I, Claire? Evan asked, and there was something desperate in his voice, something raw. What am I to you? A project? A good deed? Someone to make you feel better about yourself? The question hit like a physical blow, and Claire realized with sudden clarity that this was the moment, the crossroads where she either told the truth or lost him forever. "You're the person who makes me laugh," she said, her voice breaking. "You're the person I think about when I wake up and when I go to sleep. You're the person who sees me, really sees me, not just the quiet librarian or the helpful neighbor, but me, Claire, with all my mess and my scars and my fears. You're the person I'm falling in love with, Evan. And I don't care what anyone in this neighborhood thinks about it." The silence that followed was deafening. Evan stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Claire felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the vulnerability of having laid herself bare, felt the terror of possible rejection. "You don't know me," Evan said finally, his voice hoarse. "You don't know who I really am." "Then tell me," Claire said. "Tell me who you are." But Evan just shook his head, his face a mask of pain. "I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Why?" Claire asked, frustration and hurt bleeding into her voice. "What are you so afraid of?" "Of this," Evan said, gesturing between them. "Of you looking at me differently? Of everything changing. Nothing you could tell me would change how I feel," Claire insisted. "You don't know that," Evan said. "You can't know that." They stood there 2 feet apart but miles away, and Claire felt the moment slipping through her fingers like sand. She wanted to push, to demand answers, to break through whatever wall he'd built around his secrets. But she could see the fear in his eyes, the genuine terror, and she knew that pushing now would only drive him further away. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, you don't have to tell me. But Evan, please, please don't shut me out. Don't let them win. Don't let their cruelty make you believe you are not worthy of being loved." Evan's eyes glistened, and for a moment Claire thought he might cry, might break, might finally let her all the way in. But instead, he just nodded, a small, tight movement. "I need some time," he said, "to think, to figure things out." "Of course," Claire said, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay, to fight, to not let him retreat into whatever darkness he was battling. "Take all the time you need. I'll be next door, whenever you're ready." She left, closing the door gently behind her, and walked back to her own house through the November darkness. The street was quiet, windows glowing with warm light, families inside living their ordinary lives, unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Claire felt hollowed out, exhausted, terrified that she'd just lost the best thing that had happened to her in years. But she'd meant what she said. She'd wait. Because Evan Ross, whoever he really was, whatever secrets he was hiding, was worth waiting for. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that inside his house, Evan was sitting in the darkness, holding a letter from his late father's estate attorney, staring at words that represented billions of dollars and a life he'd left behind, trying to decide whether the woman next door, the woman who just confessed she was falling in love with him, would still feel the same way when she learned the truth. Would she still see him as just Evan? Or would she see the fortune, the name, the empire? Would she still love the man? Or would she, like everyone else in his life, only love what he could give her? He wanted to believe she was different. God, how he wanted to believe it. But belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability. And vulnerability was the one thing Evan Ross had sworn never to allow himself again. So he sat in the darkness, torn between the woman who'd seen his worth when the world saw nothing and the fear that revealing everything would destroy the one genuine connection he'd found in years of isolation and pain. And outside, the neighborhood slept, unaware that the man they'd dismissed as a nobody, the man they'd mocked and pitied and tried to drive away, was sitting on a secret that would soon turn their small, judgmental world completely upside down. But that revelation was still to come. For now, there was only the question hanging in the November air, the question that would determine everything that followed. Can love survive the weight of truth? Can two wounded people find healing in each other? Or will the secrets between them prove too heavy to bear? And when the world finally sees what it refused to see before, will it change anything that matters? Or will it only prove what Claire and Evan already know? That worth has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with the courage to see another person's heart. The answer would come soon enough, but first, there would be more pain, more revelation, more testing of the fragile bond they'd built. Because some stories don't offer easy resolutions, and some love has to be forged in fire before it can become unbreakable. What would you risk to prove that someone is worthy of love? And what would you hide to find out if you're worthy of being loved for who you truly are, not what you possess? The answers lie ahead, in the choices two lonely people will make, and in the moment when secrets can no longer stay buried. The thing about walls is that they're built for a reason. Evan Ross had spent 3 years constructing his, brick by careful brick, each one mortared with pain and betrayal and the bitter knowledge that people only see what they want to see. And for 3 years, those walls had kept him safe, kept him isolated, kept him from having to answer the question that haunted him in the darkest hours of the night. Was he inherently unlovable, or had he simply never met anyone who could love him for who he was, rather than what he represented? But now, standing in his living room at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at the letter from his father's estate attorney that had arrived that afternoon, Evan realized that walls don't just keep pain out. They also keep love trapped inside, suffocating, unable to breathe. And Claire Donovan, the woman next door who just confessed she was falling in love with him, was about to become the wrecking ball that would either demolish those walls entirely or prove once and for all that they were necessary for survival. The letter sat on his coffee table like a coiled snake, innocuous white paper with embossed letterhead that read, Whitmore, Sterling and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Evan had read it 17 times since it arrived, and each reading made his stomach twist tighter. Dear Mr. Ross, it began, formal and cold. We are writing to inform you that the estate of Marcus Evan Ross Sr. has been finalized, and as the sole surviving heir, you are required to appear in person to claim your inheritance and assume control of Ross Industries and its subsidiary holdings. The total value of the estate, including liquid assets, real property, and corporate holdings, is estimated at $4.7 billion. Your presence is required no later than December 1st to sign the necessary documents and meet with the board of directors. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule this meeting. Failure to appear may result in the estate entering probate and the dissolution of the company your father spent 40 years building. We await your response. $4.7 billion. The number was obscene, incomprehensible, a figure so large it ceased to have meaning. Evan's father, Marcus Ross, had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single construction company and expanding into real estate development, commercial properties, luxury hotels, and eventually a conglomerate that touched everything from technology to pharmaceuticals. He'd been ruthless, brilliant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Evan had grown up in mansions that felt like museums, attended elite schools where his last name opened every door, and learned early that people didn't see him. They saw the Ross fortune, the Ross name, the Ross future. Every friendship had an agenda. Every relationship had a price tag. Every smile hid calculation. And when the accident happened, when Evan's car had been forced off a mountain road by a drunk driver 3 years ago, when he'd woken up in a hospital bed with a shattered spine and a doctor gently explaining that he'd never walk again, he'd watched his entire world reveal its true nature. His fiancée, Victoria, had visited once. Once. She stood at the foot of his hospital bed, beautiful and cold in her designer dress, and said, I can't do this, Evan. I'm sorry, but I can't spend my life taking care of an invalid. You understand, don't you? She'd left her engagement ring on the bedside table and walked out, her heels clicking on the linoleum like a countdown to abandonment. His friends, the ones he'd known since prep school, had sent flowers and cards and then slowly, inevitably, stopped calling. His father had visited twice, both times to discuss business, to talk about succession plans, and whether Evan would still be capable of running the company. And when Evan had finally screamed at him to get out, to leave him alone, to stop treating him like a broken asset that needed to be written off, Marcus had looked at him with something like disappointment and said, Self-pity doesn't suit you, son. You're a Ross. Act like it. That was the last time they'd spoken. Marcus had died 8 months ago of a heart attack, alone in his office at 2 in the morning. And Evan had learned about it from a news alert on his phone. He hadn't gone to the funeral. He told himself he didn't care, that the old man had been dead to him long before his heart stopped beating. But late at night, in the quiet hours when lies became impossible, Evan knew the truth. He'd cared desperately, had wanted nothing more than for his father to see him as a son rather than a successor, as a person rather than a product. And now Marcus was gone, and that chance was gone with him. And all that remained was a fortune Evan had never wanted and a company he had no interest in running. So he'd hidden, changed his name slightly, using his mother's maiden name as a middle name and dropping the junior that had always made him feel like a copy rather than an original. Moved to this anonymous suburban neighborhood where no one knew who he was or what he'd lost. Lived quietly, carefully, determined to find out if anyone in the world could see value in Evan Ross, the person, rather than Evan Ross, the heir. And then Claire had appeared, with her kind eyes and her fierce defense and her genuine warmth. And for the first time in 3 years, Evan had felt something other than numbness. He'd felt hope. Dangerous, terrifying, intoxicating hope. But hope came with a price, and the price was vulnerability. And vulnerability meant risk. And risk meant the possibility of being destroyed all over again. What would you do if the only way to know if someone truly loved you was to hide everything you are? And what would you do when hiding became lying, and lying became a betrayal of the very person you were trying to protect? Evan picked up his phone, stared at Claire's number in his contacts, his thumb hovering over the call button. It was 2:30 in the morning. She'd be asleep. But he wanted to hear her voice, wanted to tell her everything, wanted to lay his secrets at her feet and beg her to still see him the way she had before. But fear paralyzed him, the same fear that had kept him silent for weeks. The fear that the moment she knew about the money, about the name, about the empire waiting for him to claim it, everything would change. She'd look at him differently. She'd wonder if he'd been testing her, manipulating her, playing some sick game. She'd question every moment they'd shared, every conversation, every laugh, wondering what was real and what was performance. And even if she didn't, even if she somehow still cared, the world would change around them. The neighborhood would change. The gossip would shift from pity to envy, from mockery to manipulation. People would want things from him, from her, from them. The simple, genuine connection they'd built would be buried under the weight of expectation and assumption and the suffocating reality of wealth. He put the phone down. Not yet. He needed more time. Just a little more time to be just Evan. To have Claire look at him and see a man rather than a fortune. To know that what they had was real before the world tried to make it something else. But time, as Evan was about to learn, was not a luxury he could afford. The next morning, Claire woke with a sense of dread that had nothing to do with the gray November sky or the cold that had seeped into her bones overnight. She'd barely slept, replaying the conversation with Evan over and over, analyzing every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion across his face. She'd told him she was falling in love with him, had laid her heart bare in a way she'd sworn she'd never do again after David. And Evan had responded with secrets and walls and a request for time. Part of her understood. She had her own secrets, her own walls, her own fears. But another part, the part that had been abandoned before, the part that had learned that I need time was often code for I'm looking for an exit, was terrified that she just made the biggest mistake of her life. She went through her morning routine on autopilot, showering, dressing, making coffee she didn't drink, staring out her kitchen window at Evan's house. His car was in the driveway. The lights were off, no movement visible. She wanted to go over there to knock on his door, to demand answers or at least reassurance. But she'd promised to give him space, and she was determined to keep that promise even if it killed her. Work was a blur. She shelved books without seeing their titles, helped patrons without really hearing their questions, and avoided Mrs. Henderson's attempts at conversation with a curtness that was unlike her. At lunch, she sat in the break room alone, picking at a sandwich she had no appetite for, when her coworker Jenny sat down across from her. "You okay?" Jenny asked. She was younger than Claire, mid-20s, with purple streaks in her hair and a directness that Claire usually appreciated. "Fine," Claire lied. "You're a terrible liar," Jenny said, not unkindly. "Is this about the guy next door? Because I heard about the HOA meeting. My mom was there. She said you went off on Linda Pritchard." Claire's head snapped up. "Your mom was there?" "Yeah. And for what it's worth, she said you were right, that Linda was being a judgmental witch and someone needed to call her out." Jenny leaned forward. "So what's the deal?" Are you and wheelchair guy a thing? His name is Evan, Claire said sharply, and I don't know what we are. Friends maybe, maybe more, maybe nothing. But you want it to be more, Jenny said, reading her easily. Claire sighed. Yeah, I do, but it's complicated. It always is, Jenny said. But here's the thing, Claire. You've worked here for 6 years, and in all that time, I've never seen you interested in anyone. You're always alone, always keeping everyone at arm's length, and now suddenly there's this guy who's got you all twisted up. And yeah, maybe it's complicated, but at least it's something. At least you're feeling something. That's worth fighting for, isn't it? Was it? Claire wanted to believe so. But fighting required knowing what you were fighting for. And right now, she had no idea what Evan wanted, what he was hiding, or whether she was building a future or setting herself up for another devastating fall. She went home that evening to find a car parked in front of Evan's house. An expensive car, sleek and black with tinted windows, the kind of car that didn't belong in a neighborhood like Maple Street. A man in a suit stood on Evan's porch, knocking on the door. Claire slowed her pace, watching. The door opened, and Evan appeared, his face going pale when he saw the visitor. They spoke briefly, too quietly for Claire to hear, and then Evan gestured the man inside. The door closed. Claire stood on the sidewalk, her heart pounding. Who was that? A lawyer? A debt collector? Someone from Evan's past? The questions multiplied, each one feeding her anxiety. She forced herself to go inside her own house, to not stare out the window like some obsessed stalker. But she couldn't stop thinking about the expensive car and the suited man and the look on Evan's face, which had been equal parts fear and resignation. An hour later, her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Evan on her porch, his face drawn, his eyes haunted. Can I come in? He asked. Of course, Claire said, stepping aside. He wheeled into her living room, and Claire closed the door, her pulse racing. This was it. Whatever he'd been hiding, whatever had been keeping him at a distance, he was finally going to tell her. She sat on the couch, waiting, giving him space to find the words. That man you saw, Evan began, his voice low. He's an attorney. From my father's estate, Claire's breath caught. Your father? He died 8 months ago, Evan said. We weren't close. We hadn't spoken in years. But he left me something, and the lawyers have been trying to track me down to finalize the estate. What did he leave you? Claire asked, though some instinct told her she wasn't going to like the answer. Evan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw fear and shame and something that looked like grief. Everything, he said. He left me everything. His company, his properties, his fortune, all of it. The words hung in the air, and Claire's mind struggled to process them. How much is everything? She asked carefully. Billions, Evan said, the word barely a whisper. $4.7 billion. The room tilted. Claire gripped the arm of the couch, trying to anchor herself. Billions. Evan, the man next door who struggled with grocery bags and lived in a modest ranch house and seemed so utterly, completely normal, was a billionaire. Had been a billionaire this entire time. Had been hiding it from her, from everyone, for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. Because of this, Evan said, gesturing at her face. Because of the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm a stranger. Like everything we've shared was a lie. Was it? Claire asked, and she hated the way her voice broke on the question. Was any of it real, Evan? Or was I some kind of test, some experiment to see if you could find someone who'd care about you without knowing you were rich? It wasn't like that, Evan said desperately. Claire, please, you have to understand. Everyone in my life, everyone I've ever known, has only cared about the money, about the name, about what I could do for them. My fiancée left me when I was in the hospital because she didn't want to be tied to a disabled man. My friends disappeared. My father treated me like a business asset. I needed to know if anyone in the world could see me, just me, without all the rest of it. And then I met you, and you were kind and genuine, and you saw me as a person, and I couldn't risk losing that. I couldn't risk you changing. So you lied, Claire said, and the hurt in her voice was raw, undeniable. I didn't lie, Evan protested. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Claire said, standing up. needing to move to put distance between them. You let me believe you were someone you're not. You let me fall for a version of you that doesn't exist. That version does exist, Evan said, his voice rising. I'm still the same person I was yesterday, Claire. The money doesn't change who I am. Doesn't it? Claire challenged. Because the person I thought I knew wouldn't have kept something this huge from me. Wouldn't have let me defend him to the neighborhood. Wouldn't have let me make a fool of myself at that HOA meeting. Wouldn't have let me confess my feelings without being honest about who he really is. I was going to tell you, Evan said. I just needed more time. Time for what? Claire demanded. Time to make sure I passed your test? Time to be certain I was worthy of the truth? What was the criteria, Evan? How long did I have to prove myself before you decided I deserved to know who you really are? The questions hit like blows, and Evan flinched with each one. It wasn't about you proving anything, he said. It was about me being terrified of losing the only real thing I've had in 3 years. Claire stopped pacing, turned to face him. And what about what I was terrified of? What about my fear of being abandoned again, of caring about someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest? Did you think about that, Evan? Did you think about what your secrets would do to me? The silence that followed was suffocating. Evan's face crumpled, and Claire saw tears in his eyes, saw the genuine anguish there, and part of her wanted to go to him, to comfort him, to tell him it was okay. But it wasn't okay. She'd been lied to, or at least lied to by omission, and the foundation of trust she'd thought they were building had just revealed itself to be built on sand. I'm sorry, Evan said, his voice breaking. Claire, I'm so sorry. You're right. I should have told you. I was selfish and scared, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. I need you to leave, she said quietly. Claire, please. I need you to leave, she repeated more firmly. I need time to think, to process this. I can't do that with you here. Evan looked like she'd struck him, but he nodded. Oh, okay, he said. Okay, but Claire, please believe me when I say that everything between us was real. My feelings for you are real. The person you know, that's who I am. The money is it's just something I have, not something I am. Claire didn't respond. She couldn't. She walked to the door and opened it, and Evan wheeled past her, pausing in the doorway. I love you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. I know I don't have the right to say that now, but it's true. I love you, Claire. He left, and Claire closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor as the tears finally came. He loved her. He'd lied to her and tested her and kept secrets from her, but he loved her. And God help her, she still loved him too. But was love enough when trust was broken? Was love enough when the person you thought you knew turned out to be someone completely different? How do you love someone when you don't know who they really are? And how do you forgive someone for hiding their truth when you understand exactly why they hid it? The next few days were torture. Claire called in sick to work, something she never did, and spent her time alternating between crying, sleeping, and obsessively replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Evan, looking for clues she'd missed, signs that he was more than he seemed. She avoided her windows, couldn't bear to look at his house, couldn't bear to see his car in the driveway, and knew he was right there, so close but impossibly far away. He'd texted her twice, once to apologize again, once to ask if they could talk. She hadn't responded. She didn't know what to say. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had noticed the expensive car, the suited visitor, and the gossip mill went into overdrive. Claire heard it when she finally ventured out to get her mail, heard Mrs. Chen and Linda Pritchard talking in loud whispers that were clearly meant to be overheard. I heard he's in some kind of legal trouble, Linda was saying. That man was probably a lawyer or a detective. I knew there was something off about him. Maybe he's a criminal, Mrs. Chen suggested. Maybe that's why he's hiding here. Claire wanted to scream at them, to tell them they were wrong, that Evan wasn't a criminal but a billionaire, that they'd all been mocking and pitying a man who could buy their entire neighborhood without noticing the expense. But she said nothing, just grabbed her mail and went back inside. The irony not lost on her that she was now keeping Evan's secrets, even though she was furious at him for keeping them from her. On the fourth day, Jenny showed up at her door with takeout and a determined expression. Okay, enough, Jenny said, pushing past Claire into the house. You've been wallowing for days. Time to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it, Claire said. But she took the food Jenny offered because she hadn't eaten anything but crackers in 2 days. Too bad, Jenny said. What happened? Did he do something? Because I will key his car if you need me to. Despite everything, Claire laughed, a short, bitter sound. He's a billionaire, she said. Evan, he's a billionaire and he didn't tell me. Jenny's eyes went wide. Wait, what? Claire told her everything, the whole story spilling out in a rush, the inheritance, the dead father, the years of hiding, the tests she hadn't known she was taking. Jenny listened without interrupting, and when Claire finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Okay, Jenny said finally, that's a lot, but can I ask you something? Sure, Claire said tiredly. Do you love him? That's not the point, Claire said. It's exactly the point, Jenny countered. Do you love him? Not the money, not the secret, but him. The guy you've been spending time with for the past 2 months. Do you love that person? Claire closed her eyes. Yes, she whispered. I do. And do you understand why he didn't tell you? Yes, Claire admitted, but that doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, Jenny agreed, but it makes it human. He's scared, Claire. He's been hurt, just like you have. And he made a mistake, just like people do. The question is the mistake big enough to walk away from something real? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you two have something pretty special. And special is rare. Maybe rare enough to fight for, even when it's hard. Was it? Claire wanted to believe so, but believing required forgiveness. And forgiveness required trust. And trust was the one thing she wasn't sure she could give again. That night, Claire stood at her bedroom window, looking out at Evan's house. The lights were on. She could see his shadow moving past the windows. He was so close. All she had to do was walk over there, knock on his door, tell him she understood, tell him she forgave him, tell him she loved him too. But her feet wouldn't move. Fear held her in place, the same fear that had kept her isolated for 6 years. The fear that caring meant losing, that loving meant being destroyed. And then she saw it, another car pulling up to Evan's house. Not the expensive black sedan from before, but a news van. A reporter got out, followed by a cameraman. Claire's heart stopped. They knocked on Evan's door. He answered, and even from a distance, Claire could see the shock on his face. The reporter was talking, gesturing, and then the camera light came on, bright and intrusive in the November darkness. Claire grabbed her phone, pulled up a news site, and there it was, the headline that changed everything. Billionaire heir found living in suburban. Obscurity. Evan Ross Jr., son of late business magnate, located after months of search. The story was out, the secret was exposed, and everything was about to change. Claire didn't think. She just moved. Out her door, across the lawn, up Evan's driveway. The reporter saw her coming and turned, the camera swinging in her direction. Ma'am, do you know Mr. Ross? Can you comment on— Get off his property, Claire said, her voice hard. Now. We're on a public sidewalk, the reporter said. We have a right. You have a right to leave him alone, Claire said, stepping between the camera and Evan's door. He doesn't owe you a story. Now leave. The reporter looked like she might argue, but something in Claire's face must have convinced her otherwise. She signaled to the cameraman, and they retreated to their van, though they didn't leave, just sat there, waiting, watching. Claire turned to Evan, who was staring at her with an expression of disbelief and hope and gratitude all mixed together. Can I come in? She asked. He nodded, wordless, and she followed him inside, closing the door on the watching world. They stood in his living room, the same room where they'd shared so many conversations, so many laughs, so many moments of connection. And now it felt charged with everything unsaid, everything broken, everything that needed to be repaired. I'm sorry, Evan said again. Claire, I'm so— Stop, Claire interrupted. Stop apologizing. I get it. I understand why you did what you did. And I'm sorry, too, for not seeing it sooner, for making it about me when you were just trying to protect yourself. You had every right to be angry, Evan said. I did, Claire agreed. I do. But I also love you, Evan, and I don't want to lose you over this. I don't want to let fear win again. Evan's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, he said. So much. And I promise no more secrets. Whatever happens next, we face it together. If you'll have me. Claire crossed the space between them, knelt down so they were eye level, and took his hands in hers. Together, she said. But Evan, it's going to get complicated. The media, the neighborhood, your father's company, all of it. Are you ready for that? I don't know, Evan admitted, but I know I'm ready to stop hiding. I'm ready to claim what's mine, not because I want the money, but because I want to use it for something good. And I want to do that with you, if you'll let me. Claire kissed him then, soft and gentle and full of promise. And in that moment, the world outside ceased to matter. The reporters, the neighbors, the billions of dollars, none of it mattered as much as this. As them, as the choice they were making to trust each other, despite the fear, despite the pain, despite everything that could go wrong. But outside, the world was watching. And the world, as they were about to discover, had opinions. Strong ones. And not everyone was going to be happy about the truth that had just been revealed. What happens when the person everyone dismissed as worthless is revealed to be worth billions? What happens when cruelty meets consequence, when judgment meets reality? When a neighborhood that mocked a man for his disability learns they were mocking one of the richest men in the country? And what happens when two people who found love in obscurity have to fight to keep it in the spotlight? The answers were coming, and they would test everything Claire and Evan had built, everything they believed about themselves and each other, everything they thought love could survive. The truth, once released, cannot be recalled. It spreads like wildfire, consuming everything in its path, transforming landscapes, destroying what was, and creating space for what might be. By dawn, Evan Ross's face was on every news site, every social media platform, every morning show. The billionaire next door, they called him, the hidden heir, the richest man you've never heard of. And Maple Street, that quiet suburban enclave where gossip had always been the primary currency, woke up to discover that they'd been living next to a fortune beyond imagination. And more importantly, that they'd treated that fortune with contempt, cruelty, and casual dismissal. The question wasn't whether they would regret their behavior. The question was whether regret would be enough to undo the damage they'd done, not to Evan's bank account, but to his heart. And whether Claire and Evan, two wounded souls who'd found each other in the margins, could survive being dragged into the center of a spotlight neither of them wanted. Claire woke in Evan's guest room, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back. The reporters, the revelation, the kiss, the promise to face whatever came next together. She'd stayed the night, not wanting to leave him alone, not wanting to face her own empty house, and they'd talked until 3 in the morning. Really talked. About his childhood in a cold mansion, about her years of self-imposed isolation, about the scars they both carried and the hope they'd found in each other. It had been raw and honest and exhausting, and when Claire had finally admitted she couldn't keep her eyes open, Evan had insisted she take the guest room, had said goodnight with another kiss that made her believe, truly believe, that they might actually make it through this. But morning brought reality in the form of her phone, which had 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, and a voicemail box so full it had stopped accepting new messages. Claire scrolled through them with growing horror. Her coworkers, her neighbors, distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, even her ex-fiancé David, all suddenly desperate to reach her, to ask about Evan, to offer congratulations or advice, or thinly veiled requests for money. The messages ranged from genuinely concerned to grotesquely opportunistic, and Claire felt sick reading them, understanding for the first time what Evan had been trying to protect himself from, the way wealth turned people into vultures, circling, waiting for their chance to pick at whatever they could reach. She found Evan in the kitchen, making coffee, his face drawn with exhaustion. The news was playing on his laptop, a morning show segment about him complete with old photos from his life before the accident, images of him in a tuxedo at charity galas, standing beside his father at corporate events, looking young and whole and utterly miserable. The host was speculating about why he'd hidden, whether there was a scandal, whether his disability had driven him into seclusion, whether his relationship with the mysterious neighbor woman was genuine or opportunistic. Claire watched herself appear on screen, a grainy photo someone had taken of her defending Evan at the HOA meeting, and the host's voice dripped with insinuation as she asked, did she know who he was? And if not, how does she feel now that the truth is out? Evan muted it, turned to Claire with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, he said. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Don't apologize, Claire said, accepting the coffee he offered. We knew this was coming. She gestured at her phone, though I wasn't prepared for quite this level of attention. It'll die down, Evan said, though he didn't sound convinced. Eventually. Once they realize there's no scandal, no drama, just two people trying to live their lives. But would it die down? Or would this be their new normal? Cameras and questions and constant scrutiny. Claire pushed the thought away. They'd deal with it, together. The doorbell rang and they both tensed. Evan wheeled to the window, peered out carefully. It's Linda Pritchard, he said, his voice flat. And she brought a casserole. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity. Of course she did. Should I answer it? Evan asked. Claire thought about it, about Linda's cruelty at the HOA meeting, about her casual dismissal of Evan's humanity, about the way she'd called him broken and Claire desperate. Part of her wanted to let Evan ignore it, to let Linda stand on that porch holding her casserole and her shame. But another part, the part that was tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate choices, wanted to face it head on. Yes, Claire said. Let's see what she has to say. Evan opened the door and Linda stood there, perfectly coiffed as always, holding a glass dish covered in foil, her smile bright and brittle. Evan, she said, her voice saccharine, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to bring by a little welcome gift and apologize for any misunderstanding at the HOA meeting. Misunderstanding, Evan repeated, his tone neutral. Yes, well, we didn't know who you were, of course, Linda continued, her eyes darting past him to where Claire stood in the hallway. If we'd known, we certainly would have been more welcoming. I mean, having someone of your stature in our neighborhood is quite an honor. There it was, the shift. Yesterday, Evan had been a burden, a charity case, someone to be pitied and dismissed. Today, he was an honor, someone of stature, someone worthy of respect. And the only thing that had changed was the number in his bank account. So you're saying, Evan said slowly, that if you'd known I was rich, you would have treated me like a human being. Linda's smile faltered. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, Claire said, stepping forward. You treated him like garbage because you thought he was nobody. And now that you know he's somebody, you're here with a casserole and an apology. But the apology isn't for how you treated him. It's for not knowing who he was. Linda's face flushed. I was just trying to be neighborly. You were trying to save face, Evan said, and his voice was hard in a way Claire had never heard before. You were trying to make sure that when people talk about how the neighborhood treated me, you can say you brought a casserole. But we both know the truth, Linda. You didn't see me as a person worth knowing until you saw my bank account. And that says everything about you and nothing about me. Linda's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Finally, she thrust the casserole at Evan. Well, I tried, she said, her voice tight with anger and embarrassment. I tried to be kind, and this is how you respond. You may have money, Mr. Ross, but you clearly don't have manners. She turned and stalked away, and Evan closed the door, setting the casserole on the hall table. He looked at Claire, and suddenly they were both laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from tension and absurdity and the sheer ridiculousness of human behavior. Did that really just happen? Claire asked, wiping her eyes. I think it did, Evan said, and I think we're going to be getting a lot more casseroles. He was right. Over the next few days, the neighborhood transformed. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be Evan's friend. People who'd crossed the street to avoid him now waved enthusiastically. Neighbors who'd complained about his presence now invited him to dinner parties. The HOA sent a formal letter apologizing for any miscommunication and welcoming him as a valued member of the community. It was grotesque and transparent, and it made Claire furious in a way she hadn't expected. Because it proved everything Evan had feared, that people didn't see him, they saw his worth, and worth was measured in dollars rather than character. But not everyone was opportunistic. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman across the street, came by with homemade dumplings and a genuine apology. I should have been kinder, she said simply. Money or no money, I should have welcomed you. I'm sorry I didn't. Evan accepted her apology with grace, and Claire saw the relief in his eyes, the validation that at least one person understood what actually mattered. The media attention was relentless. Reporters camped outside, trying to get interviews, trying to get photos of Claire and Evan together. The library called, asking Claire to take a leave of absence because journalists were showing up asking about her. Her phone never stopped ringing. And through it all, Evan was making decisions about his future, about the inheritance, about what came next. He met with the attorneys, signed the papers, and officially claimed the estate. But he also made it clear that he had no intention of running Ross Industries, that he'd be appointing a board of directors to manage the company while he focused on what he actually cared about, using the fortune to make a difference. He established a foundation dedicated to accessibility, to supporting caregivers, to funding research for spinal injuries, to building communities that saw people rather than limitations. And he asked Claire to help him, to be part of it, to use her understanding of what people needed to shape how the money was spent. Are you sure? Claire asked when he proposed the idea. They were sitting in his backyard, hidden from the cameras by a tall fence, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars. That's a lot of responsibility, and I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about caring, Evan said. You know about seeing people. That's more important than any business degree. He took her hand. I don't want to do this alone, Claire. I don't want to do any of it alone. I want to build something meaningful, and I want to build it with you. Claire looked at him, at this man who'd hidden a fortune to find authenticity, who'd been mocked and dismissed and had emerged with his kindness intact, who'd chosen her not because she was useful or connected or impressive, but because she'd seen him when no one else bothered to look. Okay, she said. Yes, let's do it together. They sealed the promise with a kiss, and for the first time since the truth came out, Claire felt like they might actually be okay, like the storm might be passing, like they might find their way to something resembling normal. But there was one more confrontation waiting, one more moment that would define everything. It came a week later, at the neighborhood's annual holiday gathering. Claire had wanted to skip it, but Evan had insisted they go, had said he was done hiding, done letting other people's judgment dictate his choices. So they went, walking into the community center together, Claire's hand on Evan's shoulder. Both of them braced for whatever came next. The room fell silent when they entered. Every head turned, every conversation stopped. And then slowly people began to approach, offering congratulations, asking questions, trying to ingratiate themselves. It was exhausting and fake, and Claire could see Evan's jaw tightening with each interaction. But he was polite, gracious even, answering questions about the foundation, about his plans, about his father's company. And then Linda Pritchard stepped forward, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Evan, she said, her voice carrying across the space, I owe you an apology, a real one. She looked around at the gathered neighbors. We all do. We treated you terribly. We judged you, mocked you, tried to drive you away, and we did it because we were small-minded and cruel, and we couldn't see past our own prejudices. You didn't deserve that. No one deserves that, and I'm ashamed of how I behaved. The silence was absolute. Claire felt Evan tense beside her, felt him weighing the words, deciding whether they were genuine or performative. Thank you, Evan said finally. I appreciate that. He paused, then continued, his voice stronger. But I want to be clear about something. I didn't reveal who I was to make you feel bad or to prove a point. I revealed it because I was tired of hiding, and because someone I care about very much was being hurt by your judgment. The money doesn't make me more valuable than I was last month. It doesn't make me more worthy of respect or kindness. I'm the same person I was when you called me a burden, when you mocked Claire for spending time with me, when you tried to drive me out of this neighborhood. The only thing that's changed is your perception, and that should tell you something about yourselves, not about me. He looked around the room, meeting eyes, holding gazes. I hope you'll learn from this. I hope you'll remember that every person you meet has value, regardless of their bank account, their physical ability, their social status. Because the measure of a community isn't how it treats the powerful, it's how it treats the vulnerable. And by that measure, this neighborhood failed, spectacularly. The room was silent, faces flushed with shame, and Claire felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This was the man she loved, not the billionaire, not the heir, but the person who'd been hurt and had chosen to respond with truth rather than cruelty, with grace rather than revenge. Linda nodded slowly. "You're right," she said, "and we'll do better." "I'll do better." "I hope so," Evan said. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed the tension in the room. "Now, I believe there's supposed to be food at this thing, and I'm starving." Laughter rippled through the crowd, the tension breaking, and people began to move again, to talk, to return to something resembling normalcy. Claire leaned down, whispered in Evan's ear, "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," he whispered back. "You taught me that I was worth loving, even when I didn't believe it myself." They stayed for an hour, mingling, talking, and slowly Claire began to see glimpses of what the neighborhood could be, what it might become. Not perfect, not without prejudice, but maybe, just maybe, a little more aware, a little more willing to see people rather than assumptions. As they left, walking back to Evan's house under a sky full of stars, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fragile, tentative hope of someone afraid to believe, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd been tested and had survived. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Evan said, "we build the life we want. Together, we run the foundation, we help people, we make a difference, and we do it on our terms, not anyone else's." "Sounds perfect," Claire said. "It won't be easy," Evan warned. "There will be more scrutiny, more judgment, more people wanting things from us." "I know," Claire said, "but we'll face it together. That's what matters." Evan stopped, turned his chair to face her fully. "Marry me," he said. Claire's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me," Evan repeated. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you. I know that you're the person who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when the world said I wasn't worth loving, who stood by me when everything fell apart. Marry me, Claire. Build this life with me, not because of the money or the foundation or any of it, just because I love you and you love me, and that's enough." Claire knelt down, took his face in her hands, kissed him with everything she had. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you." And there, on a quiet street in a neighborhood that had learned a hard lesson about worth and value and the danger of judgment, two people who'd been broken by the world found wholeness in each other. The money would always be there, a tool to do good, a responsibility to manage. The scrutiny would fade but never fully disappear. The scars they both carried would heal but leave marks. But none of that mattered as much as this. They'd found each other. They'd chosen each other. And they'd proven that love, real love, sees worth where the world sees nothing. Because in the end, that's what this story was always about. Not the fortune or the revelation or the neighborhood shame. It was about a woman who dared to see value in a man the world had dismissed. It was about a man who dared to believe he was worthy of being loved for who he was, not what he had. It was about two wounded souls who found healing in each other's honesty, who built trust from broken pieces, who proved that the most valuable thing in the world isn't money or status or power. It's the courage to see another person's heart and the grace to let them see yours. Claire and Evan married 6 months later, a small ceremony with people who actually mattered, people who'd proven they could see past surfaces to substance. They built their foundation into something transformative, changing lives, creating opportunities, proving that wealth used with wisdom and compassion could actually make the world better. And they lived in that same modest house on Maple Street, refusing to move to some mansion or gated community, determined to stay rooted in reality, in community, in the life they'd chosen together. The neighborhood changed too, slowly but surely. Linda Pritchard became an advocate for accessibility, using her organizational skills to make the community more inclusive. Mrs. Chen started a welcome committee that actually welcomed people, regardless of their circumstances. And the story of Evan Ross, the billionaire next door, became a cautionary tale told at HOA meetings and block parties, a reminder that you never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, that it shouldn't matter. Because worth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in kindness, in courage, in the willingness to see and be seen. And by that measure, Claire and Evan were the richest people on Maple Street. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Who in your life have you dismissed? Who have you judged based on appearances, on circumstances, on assumptions about their value? And what would change if you chose to see them, really see them, the way Claire saw Evan? Because we all have the power to recognize worth where others see nothing. We all have the choice to love people for who they are rather than what they have. And we all have the opportunity to build communities that measure value in humanity rather than status. The story of Claire and Evan isn't just their story. It's a mirror reflecting back our own prejudices, our own judgments, our own failures to see. But it's also a promise, a possibility, a reminder that it's never too late to do better, to be better, to choose love over judgment and compassion over cruelty. So tell me, what will you choose? Who will you see today that you didn't see yesterday? And how will you measure worth, not just in others, but in yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what it means to be human. Because these stories matter. Your story matters. And together we can build a world that sees worth in every person, regardless of what they have or don't have, regardless of their circumstances or their struggles. That's the legacy of Claire and Evan. That's the lesson of Maple Street. And that's the challenge I'm leaving you with today. What will you do with it?